Hi, welcome back to Spirit Lounge. Hope you guys are doing really well. So this is slightly bent. There you go. Welcome back. Hope you guys are doing really well and healthy and happy. Welcome to the next installment of the Upanisads, the precursor chapters that we're going to cover. Apologies for the slight delay and the gap between this and the last one. I had a lot of things on personally that I needed to do and was distracted in, so I didn't happen to jump on to do this video, although I did write the PowerPoint slides last week actually for this. So let's jump straight into it. So no further ado. Okay, so this is the individual self. Again, this is some precursor information, narrative we'll find useful before we jump in. I haven't got very far to go now until we actually jump into Upanishads, but it does cover what they say to some degree. Okay, we'll skip the introduction here, but the Upanishads again were written 700 to 400 BC, evolving over time as they were added to by various seers who received mystical knowledge through meditative practice, and some in forests. And they're the latter of the four Vedas, the fifth, if you like, which the first four were the Rig, Sama, Yajur, and Atharva Vedas. And they were composed over between 1200 to 400 BC, but obviously Hinduism was said to be being practiced about 10,000 years to 5,000 years BC, depending on who you speak to. But let's just jump straight into this. So some terms that will come through is jiva, that which is breathes, i.e. the breath or the life, jiva being the life. Jiv, to breathe, and Purusa, which dwells in the heart, and Buddhi, which is the spiritual seers, or the spirituality part of us. Okay, so it says here, Jiva, which goes on throughout life, which is the breath of life, in other words, goes through the waking, dream, and sleep states. When we discussed what those were. The sleep space, the waking part, the dream part being that which we're asleep and material, the waking part being where we get to the psychical, and the sleep part is actually the opposite of what Gnostics say. It was the more the divine, when we're moving into the divine states of consciousness part. It's called Purusa, that which dwells in the heart. The biological serves the soul or the psyche. The soul is the soul of the spirit, which reaps the fruits of deeds and survives death. Bhakta is the enjoyer, Kata is the doer, and Jiva consists of the material body principle of breath, which is prana. So there's a lot of words being pulled in here. Regulates unconscious activity. So the breath regulates, which regulates unconscious activity, as does the soul and the psyche. Conscious activity, which is called manas, uses the five sensory organs of action, speech, five sensory organs, and the five organs of action, which are the mouth to speak, the hands, the feet, the excretory, and the regenerative organs. Organized by vijnana or buddhi, which is the spiritual context. Vijnana is the ego or the intelligence, and draws around itself mind, life, and body. Ego belongs to the relative world, a center around which our experiences gather. Back of this whole structure is the universal conscious, which is called the Atman of the inner self. So effectively, what this condensed version of this section is basically saying is that we have a breath of life within us, or the breathing is the center of what gives the body life. The body is the biological construct, which then serves the soul or the psyche to then experience life. We reap the fruits of what we experience through this body, but our soul or psyche survives death. We have the breath of life, which is the prana, which is what our breathing, which regulates and supports the material body. We have five sensory organs, which is the sight, the hearing, the taste, the smell, and the touch. And also we have the five organs of action, which are then organized by the intelligence and the spiritual self to then also draw aligned itself the mind, life, and body, and so on and so forth, and the ego, and then the universal consciousness that surrounds all things. So it's quite a complicated passage this was to condense down, but it does throw in a lot of the Sanskrit words there. Okay, it says the human individual is a complex of 5 elements. It's Anna, which is the spiritual nourishment, Prana, which is the breath, Manas, which is the activity, Vijnana, which is the ego, and Ananda, which is the freedom and bliss. So we've got spiritual nourishment, breath, activity, ego, and then freedom and bliss. Life and matter are organized into the gross physical body, which is the physical part of us. Mind and life into the subtle body, which is the Suksuma Sarira, which is the subtle body. Remember that we talked about the different layers of body, the physical and the various layers of energetic body in some previous videos. Intelligence into causal body. So you've got your physical body. They're talking about the subtle body, which is the mind and life portion. It talks about intelligence, which is in the causal body or the Karana Sarira, and the Atman, which is the self. The universal self is the supreme being sustaining all the others, which is the spiritual being. Ego is the manifestation of the universal self using memory and moral being. Changing formations, which means it changes. The ego changes, the physical self changes. And the Buddhi belongs to the objective hierarchy of being. And Purusa is the subjective light of consciousness. So the Buddhi is the spiritual part of us, and the Purusa, if you remember from the previous slide, is that which dwells in the heart of us, which is the center of consciousness. He has a body and a mind. His self is not derived from any of these, though it is at the root of them all. Physical, biological, psychological, and logical aspects of his nature. So it's based, man is more than what he knows about himself. And that's what the Taittiriya Upanishads says, that we have a body and a mind. His self is not derived from any of these, though it is at the root of all of them all, the physical, biological, psychological, and logical aspects of his nature. The ego is a unity of body, life, mind, and intelligence, which could be true. We develop our ego, and it grows depending on our attachment and what we think of ourselves through our intellectual and mind selves, and then obviously that drops down into our physical appearance, the life that we live, all builds ego, which is true. Intelligence gives us the ego consciousness. Memory helps preserve the continuity of the ego. Subconscious plays a part in it. Ego is the principle of organization and experience to be organized. Variety of experiences identify themselves. So we have fame, career, possessions, and power, which basically they're saying that we have a variety of experiences. We have mind, body, and life, which through that we develop various states of ego, and many develop very large, unwarranted, totally expanded and uncontrolled egos, also depending on how they identify themselves through their fame, career, possessions, and power. What we are depends on what we have been regarding the ego. So the ego looks at ourselves from a physical perspective, a mind intellectual perspective, and develops an ego. An ego is a changing formation, which it is. It constantly changes. Anything physical changes, or something expressing from the physical changes. Up towards union with the divine Godhead, or down to the fiendish extremes of selfishness. So depending on our ego, will it be balanced or otherwise, it can either drop us down into our more material physical selves and into the desire-driven, more drifting us away from our divine selves into more darker, dense frequency behaviors, which is called fiendish extremes of selfishness here. Or we can have an ego that allows us to expand out beyond ourselves towards a divine state of being. Extremes of selfishness, stupidity, and sensuality, which we discussed. The self-transcending capacity of the jiva that which breathes is the proof it is not the limited entity. So what it's saying here is that the capacity of the jiva, which is that which breathes, otherwise, in other words, the consciousness, the awareness which is within us, is transcending, which is saying that this is proof that we are not a limited entity. That if we are attaching to our physical being, would give us the impression that we are a limited entity, and this is all that we are. Okay, the order of phenomena which has the lowest degree of reality in the existential scale has the lowest degree of value in the ethical or spiritual scale. The human individual is higher than the animal, plant, or mineral. So what it is basically saying, the phenomena which has the lowest degree of reality, which basically is talking about physical form. It's saying that which is regarded as a lower degree of physical form, which it says lowest degree here, or value in the ethical or spiritual scale. So it's saying that if it's a lower form, say a blade of grass or a worm or an ant, it has a lesser value in the ethical or spiritual scale. The human individual is higher than the animal, plant, or mineral. Now, I totally disagree with all of this because, and I've stated this from the very beginning of my channel, all life has the same preciousness and value in an ethical or spiritual scale if we wish to think of things as a scale. Just because our consciousness is in a human vessel, able to express the spiritual being within us at much, much further expanded states than, say, an ant or a worm could potentially express, because they're in a vessel which cannot express its spirituality, its divine breath within it, any further than what the body of the worm or an ant will allow it to express. Our consciousness is able to express outwards, so therefore we could say we're of evolved consciousness. Therefore, we're in a vessel that serves our ability to express that consciousness, to express our divine Godhead much, much further, because the state of the being within us is of a vaster expressionable content. That doesn't mean that it's better. The worm has a spiritual being within it as well, that is supreme within the form that it's in. That doesn't make it lesser than in an ethical or spiritual scale. It's probably, if you think about it relatively, a worm probably expresses to its absolute fullest spiritual and ethical expression within its vessel than what a human being does in its vessel. We can't say that a human being, just because we are in a human being, we feel ourselves superior to all that surrounds us, are more superior than a worm, because do we express divine love, divine sight and perception and awareness and expansion and understanding of all possibility and probability of our divine realm, that in which we find ourselves experiencing, to the full extent of what our vessel will allow? Absolutely not. We probably express less than 5% of that. Whereas an ant or a worm may emit 100% of their awareness of everything they can potentially conceive and perceive within the vessel in which they're bound, but without any gaps or flaws within that. They have no barriers to that expression. Whereas humanity has absolute barriers within expression. If it did not, you wouldn't be listening to my videos. We wouldn't be seeking something greater than ourselves. We wouldn't be seeking a spiritual awareness and understanding what we are. We wouldn't be seeking and worshipping gods and idols. We wouldn't be following religions in the masses. We wouldn't be allowing others to tell us what to do, what to think, what to believe, what not to believe, who to love, who to hate, which sides to be on, and so on and so forth. We are still on a certain journey of seeking to become the capacities that we're able to express in this body. We are far, far away from that. So I don't believe an animal is lesser than us, or a plant is lesser than us. It is the same value, it is the same expression, it's the same divine force within it as we have. It just expresses differently because of the vessel that bounds it. So it's a dogma to think that I think this is just religious dogma. It's very much in the Hindu state, Hinduism, that believes this kind of thing. And it starts to make us think that we were animals before, we were plants before, and we've just raised our consciousness beyond a plant and now have become an animal, and now we've raised our consciousness beyond an animal and now have become human. That's not necessarily the case either. So I don't agree with that. I think this is what I call dogma, and it's life and spiritual content, and divine content is way more nuanced than that. And so I would ask you guys to maybe reflect on that a little bit more, then think of things differently than the dogma of religion over the millennia have impressed upon us. Okay, Samkara, which is a Sanskrit text, states a universal self is identical with the individual self. Individual self is eternal, with eternally. I've missed that word out. Which is self is eternally, with also other difference, with and also different from universal self. Says Ramanuja. Ramanuja states individual self is individual self eternally different from the universal self according to Madhva. So this is essentially saying that our individual self is eternal but is different to our universal self, and different texts say the universal self is identical to the individual self. I would just not to be too concerned about how this is split up, because ultimately we are just a divine spirit. It doesn't matter about the universal self or the individual self or the subconscious self and the conscious self. We are just self. We are just a spiritual light within us, a breath of our divine grace. And that's all we are. We don't need to concern ourselves with our individual self or universal self. Once we're connected with our spiritual being, we are all of those things all at once. There is no separation from any of these things. So this is where, same in the Gnostic text, they have a similar kind of vibration. These age-old dogmatic beliefs, remember when they were written, there are very, very, very expansive texts, very spiritual, esoteric texts, and have absolute validity. But what the perception in which they were written by those who received this information at the time was bound by the dogma of the day. But it's not necessarily dogma of the day, it's just a way of thinking of the day. And even though it was written back then, and we see it as dogma today, there's not many people who are writing texts as expansive as this today. Okay, the soul, I said, to be an amsa, which is a fragment, which is the soul is a fragment of the divine. It's what we call a fractal of the divine mind. Souls therefore serve as matter for divine forms. In the Samkhya theory, Amsa presides over lives through the ages, which means it exists eternally, it lives on. Persistent divine form is the real individuality which governs the mutations of our being. So I can't seem to speak today. It's not limited by ego, infinite spirit reflecting itself in our personal experience. Behind the flux, a stable power of our being through which the infinite manifests itself. Divine has many modes of manifestation and at many levels. The world, the soul, represent an idea of the divine mind. Different souls are members of the supreme. The soul draws its idea of perfection from the divine creator. All this is self-explanatory here. The soul, or the spirit as I call it, I don't see there being any difference to these things. Is the matter for divine forms? Yeah, it's the spiritual matter of divine forms. It does persist. It lives on. It governs our mutations, and it's beyond limited ego. It is not ego. It doesn't have ego. And it is the stable power behind our infinite incarnative lives. And it's an idea. It's an idea because of the divine mind, i.e. the creative force, because we are an expression of intention and thought. The breath of our spirit is an intention and thought of the divine. So therefore we are an idea of the divine mind, or the supreme or divine creator, as it states in this passage. Okay, there does not seem any suggestion that the individual egos are unreal. They exist only through the self. No reality apart from it. Individuals do not resolve themselves in the universal absolute so long as the world of manifestation is functioning. It's an important thing to reread that. The individuals do not resolve themselves in the universal absolute so as long as the world of manifestation is functioning. What does this actually mean? So, first of all, the suggestion that the individual egos are unreal, they're not unreal, they are real. We'll as we come into life over and over again, we pick up our ego states, we pick up our personalities, we pick up all of these things from the Akasha as we drop down into the material realm. It's like we are reclothed within our spiritual frequency, that which we left behind last time, and all that comes with that, the good, the neutral, and the positive. And it's also saying individuals do not resolve themselves in the absolute as long as the world of manifestation is functioning. This basically means that as long as we're attached, we cannot resolve ourselves in the universe absolute, which basically means we cannot transcend it as long as the world of manifestation, i.e. our attachment to the world of matter, our attachment to the world of the physical. We have to become detached and transcend beyond this. But as long as that the world is functioning, that i.e. we're attaching to it, we're functioning only within it, we will not transcend and become what it says here, resolve ourselves in the universal absolute. Very, very, very appropriate sentence. It's something that's for me is totally true. Released individuals know themselves as the self, and not as the psycho-physical beings which are animated by the self, and so are incarnations of the self. So it's saying released individuals are those that have transcended beyond the functioning of the world manifestation and have gone towards their psychical spiritual being and beyond their material vehicles, and therefore understand that they are just animations. The spirit just animates those various incarnations of experience that we have, in which our true self sits inside. Individual is in a sense created by God after his own image. After his own image, it's an interesting thing. I've read this many times in different texts. For me, this means God is not. The divine is formless. The divine source is formless. It doesn't have an image. So what does it mean when it says an individual is in a sense created by God after his own image? It's talking about the spiritual part of us. We are the image of the divine from a spiritual aspect of us. Not that we've got arms, legs, a face, ears and eyes and a nose. It's the spiritual divine element within us. So that is the image in which we are a reflection of. It's not physical. Nothing that you read within spiritual text should be read and understood initially but through it physical. In fact, don't read anything with the interpretation of it being a physical representation. It's always a spiritual, silent, formless representation of what this actually means. So, created in the God's image, yes, everything's created in God's image, not the form. The spiritual, transcendent nature of us is the God's image. That's why everything that exists, animate or inanimate, matter or non-matter, physical, non-physical, visible, non-visible, is a reflection of the divine's image, because it's the divine transcendental part that's existing within it that animates it, that gives it existence. Likeness, but he has his creaturely form. So when it says he has his creaturely form, it doesn't mean that we are. This depends how you read this. This is saying that we are of the creaturely form of the divine with arms, legs. No, that's not the case. We are of a creaturely form, of which there are infinite amounts of creaturely forms. Ego is subject to avidya, which is ignorance, absolutely. The more egotistical we become, the more limited and closeted that we are, to receive something that's different to what our ego says is true. And therefore we limit our ability to expand and transcend beyond ourselves. So this is very, very true. The ego, the bigger the ego, unfortunately, the more intellectually ignorant we become to spiritual realities. When it believes itself to be separate and different from all other egos, the result is a failure to enter into harmony and unity with the universe, expresses itself in physical suffering and mental discourse. We've discussed this in a couple of videos. Failure to enter into harmony and unity with the universe results express itself in physical suffering and mental discord. When we mentioned before that the further and further we move away from our true spiritual transcendental nature is then when we move away from the path. We're always on a spiritual path. Everything is on a spiritual path, back to the divine. We have physical experiences on this path that we create, but we're always on this path. But we can divert creating physical experiences and be completely divergent from the spiritual path and drop into what we've already talked about here is the world of manifestation, functioning crudely and strongly. We may achieve desire-driven things, but we'll have physical suffering, mental discord, detachment. We'll have a selfishness, desire, and a badge of subjection or bondage, which will subject ourselves and bound ourselves to the physical side. And we'll have unhappiness, discontentment. If the spiritual push is strong enough, we'll know this. Even though we're on a different path, we'll feel that discord within us. And that's what this is saying. When the individual shakes off avidya, i.e. ignorance, it possesses all and enjoys all. There is no mixing up of the fruits of action, as the different individual selves are kept distinct by their association with buddhi or the spiritual seed. Ego's possession of intelligence gives it moral choice. This is true. So it says here, the ego's possession of intelligence gives it moral choice. In other words, our ego, depending on what it is, will determine our choices. We'll find different things ethical and moral, and we'll have our free will choices will be determined by, I would say, our ego, which determines those underlying factors. Turn to the indwelling spirit or interests of the ego. So depending again on our ego, we'll turn to the indwelling spirit or we'll turn to the interests of our elevated and boundless ego. We'll either choose light and life or darkness and death, which is also spiritual death, remember. There are seeds of both in us, which is free will, which is the possibility of duality. Duality is not implicit, it's not implied, it's explicit upon our actions, words, thoughts, and deeds in life. It's controlled by flesh, the earthborn intellect, or be an earthborn intellect, or be open to God. When we forget our true nature and lose ourselves, we have evil and suffering. That's correct. Okay, in the Katha Upanishads, it states the Supreme Lord experiences the results of deeds, which are actions, words, thoughts, and intentions. So, everything that we do, everything that we are, all actions, words, thoughts, and intentions are absorbed within the divine because we're all aspects. We're all ideas. We're all expressions of the divine. So that's not what this is saying. The Lord experiences the results of our deeds. In other words, everything that we experience, the divine absorbs because we are all one within it. Intimate connection, but we have an intimate connection between God and the world of souls. The Absolute is not a metaphysical abstraction of a void of silence. For me, it is a void in its core from which the world manifests and expels. And the silence is that it's not a busy world like we live in. There is a silence, but there is a belonging. It's home. There's everything that exists within it is there, but also not there. It waits for manifestation. So it's a void of complete possibility, probability, or manifestation in which it is expressed from within, from an idea or a thought that we also can have. So it is a void, it is a silence, But maybe it's not just only that, as it's saying here. It is the absolute of this relative world of manifestation. Yes, it is. But that came from the void of silence, which is thought and expression and intention and love. It is change and growth in the world reaches fulfillment in the world of the absolute. The beyond is not an annulling of the world of becoming, but its transfiguration. That's true. So when we move beyond or transcend beyond this, it's not that it cancels this out, but it's the transfiguration of us, our experiences in this material realm through our divine spirit, which then transcends us beyond this. It doesn't cancel it out. It's a passage through which we pass, and we keep those experiences with us. If the world were unreal, we cannot progress from the unreal to the real. So this is saying that the world cannot be just an illusion, because if it were, we wouldn't be able to transcend from it into the real. That is partly true. I feel the world is an illusion only because it's not our home. We are not of this world, and we didn't come from this world. We are not of this universe. We didn't manifest from this universe. We manifested from the all, the overriding principle of the Divine Father, and from the unreal to the real. So it's really perception. Real as we experience it, but it's not real as it's not our origin, middle, or end. So for me, it is unreal, but it's also real because when we experience it, it's real. And we are transcending from it to a greater a spiritual being, to reattachment to our spiritual being, to therefore transcend beyond it. Ignorance of mind, which is intellectual ego, senses, human life are the material of that being for its unfolding. Ultimate reality sustains. So this is saying human life, the material of that being for its unfolding. It effectively means that we're in human bodies. We're experiencing life in material sense, and our understanding of the ultimate reality is the unfolding of our experience from being of a human life or the material being. Ultimate reality sustains the play of the world. In other words, the spirit animates our bodies. Why we are able to measure the distance of things of the world from the absolute. Nothing is not lit up by God. This is saying why we are able to measure the distance of things of the world from the absolute. So the fact that we have a divine spirit within us, which is trying to nudge its way outward, if we allow it, is telling us the fact that this nudging we're aware of this nudging, we're trying to connect to this nudging, is the faculty through which we're able to understand that from this reality there is the world of the divine beyond. There is something beyond which we are part of, which everything is part of, because of this animation, ultimate reality that sits within us, which is saying here is the play of the world. Even material objects which lack intelligence to discover nature are emanations of the creative energy. This is talking about the worm, the blade of grass, the ant. It's saying material objects which lack intelligence to discover nature. They don't lack intelligence. They lack the ability to express it. Yeah, the mind is, yes, of course, our minds are much larger, of course. So in that way, our intellect, our intelligence, our ability to think is beyond all comprehension to a worm. But it's the vessel, remember. The mind is relative to the vessel that which it is in. Our emanations of creative energy. What is not possible for inanimate and non-rational beings is open to the rational human being. Absolutely. But it's our challenge to fully use this vessel. Yeah, we have a vessel which we can boast is the top of the food chain and the master of all that we perceive around us. But are we truly expressing our spiritual consciousness, our spiritual connection, in which this vessel was created for us to, in which we dropped in this vessel? We weren't dropped in this vessel to be imprisoned within it with limitation. This vessel will allow us to express all that our spiritual being offers us, to the point of transcendence beyond material form altogether. We can do all of that within this body. How many of us do that, even to a slightest degree, is the question. And I would say very, 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 very few of us, and we're all on this journey to do that over many, many lifetimes. We are not coerced by the exercise of his choice, which is free will. The world is real as based on Brahma, which is pure consciousness. It is unreal by itself. And I put only real as it's experienced as matter, which is Anna. Okay, final slide in this is alienation from our true nature is hell. This is true. Reincarnation in lower vibration realms is hell. So alienation from our true nature is very important. This very small segment of the overall sentence. A union with it is heaven. Let's just continue. We'll go back to more further discussion and discourse on this. Alienation from our true nature is hell. Union with it is heaven. We reach from an arbitrary, which is random, place into an ideal state. Without the individual, there is neither bondage nor liberation. Eternal in his transcendent form as Brahma, which is supreme consciousness, self-expression of the supreme through the individuals, which is form ego, will continue until it is completed, which is the return to the vibration whence it started. So as long as we are subject to ignorance, we stand away from God in our limited egos, rise to self-knowledge, up into the divine being, and become aware of the infinite universal consciousness. Let's break this passage down. So alienation from our true nature is hell. Absolutely. Hell is here. We don't have to look down beneath under the ground. We don't have to look into the heavens to find a devil who will take us to a fiery hell, and where all manner of depraved things await those who are have chosen non-love vibratory lives. It's the alienation, the hell truly is, when we have completely and utterly disregarded and detached ourselves from the divine altogether. Those who live in material, we could call this those who have dismissed the mere existence of the divine and have become just intellectual, mind-orientated beings. They are not bad people. In fact, so many of them are very loving and all of them are very loving and kind, I'm sure. But they're attached to this physical space. This life will be a recurring lifetime for them until they realize that there is something greater than themselves. So alienation from the true nature, i.e. denial that there is a spiritual being, which means that you'll never ever traverse the journey to reconnect to your true spirit, your true self, the true I, the union of the divine which sits within you. Not doing that in a spiritual sense is absolute hell. This is the true definition of hell, is the alienation from our divine spirit. The union and the heavenly union with your internal self, and the removal of suffering and misdirection in physical life happens when you have a union with the divine spirit and allow its journey to express effortlessly before you, because the path will be laid out before you. Hurdles will be removed. You'll be laid out on a path which you follow because you're guided by the divine grace that's within you to move you into directions that you never thought you would go, and how effortlessly and how loving that journey truly is, and all the prosperity and abundance you'll need, and health and longevity you'll need to traverse it will be given to you, will be shown to you. Alienation from that journey is hell for me. It absolutely is. And reincarnation, why does that exist? Well, it exists because we haven't, not because we're being punished in some way and sent by some omnipotent punishing being down to earth, because we've been judged. We judge ourselves through our own spiritual disconnection. And reincarnation is because we have not removed our incarnational vibrationary frequency whilst in lifetime after lifetime beyond the physical realm. If we don't, we'll be drawn back towards it through our own free will choice, because we make those determinations when we're in infinite state, not in physical state, of infinite state. And so we see life in a very different paradigm. And so we're drawn back into these lower realms, not through. We wonder when we're in physical form. Why are we even here? This is horrible. Some of us feel this life, physical life, humanity has lost its way. Why are we even here? Why are we eternally coming down here? This is the perception we have while in body. And if we look around us, we wouldn't be wrong to think and feel these things. But our determinations of life is taken from a divine perspective. We enter life from our free will divine choice, from a divine vibration when we're no longer in body. We find ourselves in body, and then we wonder what we're doing here. We try to find and reconnect with our spirits all over again. Some of us do, some of us don't, some of us go the completely opposite way. And this is why reincarnation exists. And the bondage, there is bondage or liberation. Bondage is really us not moving and transcending beyond the frequency of physical matter. The liberation is when we transcend into our spiritual matter, which is what's called as the Brahman, or the supreme pure consciousness, which is what we're trying to see, which is the self-expression of the supreme absolute, or the divine, or the grace, or God. And we move ourselves from the base of our egos and our senses and action senses. And this is where it's called the return to, we will continue until this is completed, which means we remove ourselves from the cycle of matter, away from ignorance, and we stand in our position with self-knowledge and towards the divine being. Let's give me a drink some water there. So this is quite a short passage. Apologies for my inability to speak earlier on. I got a bit tongue-tied at the beginning of this. This is quite a difficult passage to write out, even though it was quite short. The author's narrative was it goes everywhere. It's throwing in different passages from the Upanishads themselves, and they kind of go all over the place. So I was trying to take what if you read it was